just have one thing to say. It's going to be getting pretty ugly pretty soon in my house. No beauty shops to get my hair colored. No nail salon to get my nails filled. Jim even asked me the other day, he said, "Do you think you'll be able to cut my hair?" And my reply was, "Jim, what do you think?" Trust me, I'll film all of it just for you. So we came home from our cruise, and a few days later, our daughter-in-law, who is a doctor, really sat us down and over the phone and had a good talk with us about where we were in the world with this coronavirus and what was to come and how soon it was to come and what we needed to do. And we took her seriously. And we decided that we were going to self-isolate. And on the 10th of March, it was decided that I would stay in. I would be the one who would not leave the house or our little gated community at all. Jim was going to continue to play golf. We felt like that it was okay for him to play golf. It was outside. He and his little foursome were first off in the morning, and it was early in the morning, and they could drive separate carts. They could wipe down, Clorox down their golf carts and their golf clubs and balls, and they would be safe. And he would stop by our Publix, which is right on the corner, less than a mile from where we live, maybe even a half a mile. So that was the plan. I would stay in. He would pick up anything that we really needed. If it couldn't be bought at the Publix or the Winn-Dixie right across the street, we would do without. It didn't matter what it was. And we've had some funny things happen since then with his little trips to the grocery store. But on the 10th, I sort of became a recluse. And as of today, that's 15 days. I walk Biscuit. And on the inside of our little gated community, the road that you see me walking on right now, if you walk completely around it, it is a quarter of a mile, just like a track that you would at a school. I can walk down this little drive next to the pool where we can launch any boats or kayaks or paddle boards. And we have a pier that goes out about a quarter of a mile into the St. Andrews Bay. If you go out the gate, we're less than 5 minutes to the ocean where we can go on the beach. It's our favorite place to sit on the beach. But this is our little pier, and out at the very end of the pier we have boat slips that owners could buy to house their boat slips. But it's a quarter mile out and a quarter mile back. And when I walk this entire distance, that would be a quarter of a mile around. And then if I make this little trek out to the pier, to the end and back, that's another half mile. So 3/4 of a mile. And I do multiple laps of this on a daily basis, depending on how I feel. Sometimes I come out to this pier and I walk out and back, out and back, out and back. I'm playing music in my ears, and it's usually very solitary. And I truly enjoy this walk. This is early in the morning. and I love this. So, other than being in my house, this has been my life since the 10th of March. And since then, I have been, because I'm not a journaler, I have been taking my planner that I never write anything in other than appointments, but there's a little bit of space there, and I've tried to make it a point to write, just jot down notes of things I've done that day. Maybe it was making surgical masks for my daughter-in-law in Little Rock, who's working the triage, the one who told us to go ahead and stay in. I saw that these were being made, and we all know the shortage of the protective equipment for our medical, not just our medical staff, but everyone who works at a hospital, whether they're maintenance or dietitians or they keep the rooms clean. There's a shortage. So I had the idea to do that, and I asked my daughter-in-law. Honestly, I thought she would say no. Oh, you don't have to do that. But when I presented that to her without even hesitating, she said, would you do that for me? Thank you. So I've made her quite a few masks. I decided I had to get out one day and buy supplies for those masks. And Jim and I chose a morning to go to JoAnn's first thing when they opened, because we thought, number one, the store would be clean, and number two, it would probably be empty. And that's exactly what happened. We were there when they opened, and there were a couple of sales clerks there, and for a while I was the only person, and when I left there were only two people, and we were across the store from each other all the time. So that was the only time I've been outside of our gates, other than one morning Jim needed to go to the bank. The bank lobby was closed. We went through the drive-through, and then we drove along the ocean so that we could see the ocean. We never got out of our car. We drove out, we came straight back. And those are the only times in 15 days that I have been outside the gates. I've had friends when I've talked to them on the phone and texted, and I've had neighbors ask me if I was getting stir crazy or if I had cabin fever. And I said, no, not at all. I was single. Many of you know, I was single for 35 years before I met Jim. I know how to be by myself. We're finding that, we being in this house all the time or in this condo all the time, we need some time alone. And many times I'll get up and just go in our bedroom where we have a second TV and sit on the bed and watch TV and come back in. Or I may sit out on the porch and knit. But it's going just fine. We've had a ball reading all of the funny things that are popping up on Facebook especially. If he reads something and it's funny, he shares it with me, and I do the same with him, and we give it a good chuckle. But this is my little walk. Not only every single day, but multiple times every single day. I'll just get out and do my little walk. The weather has been beautiful, not too hot so that I can do this even in the heat of the day. I'm so fortunate and so blessed to live in this little community right now at this time. Good neighbors. We're all keeping our distance when we meet up or come across each other, it's interesting that you can have a conversation 8 or 10 feet apart from each other. And the dogs can bark and we can laugh and talk about how we're doing. So you've just walked 3/4 of a mile with me. Were you walking? If you weren't, stand up and start this all over again. And just step in place. You can do it. Come on, get up, get up, get up, get up. Here I am in the little bitty bathroom where I'm going to try to film videos for the unforeseeable future. Now, you saw my walk, but I wanted to tell you a story and then also show you something that is so near and dear to my heart and so relevant, I think, for what we're going through right now. I wanted to tell you a story because this just for some reason popped up the other day, and I thought, oh my gosh, tell me if this happened to you, if you're anywhere close to my age, if this happened to you when you were a small child. This was back when we were getting spankings, and I probably was, I don't know, 6, maybe 7 at the most. And I don't know what I had done, but it angered my mother. And I saw her get the switch off of a tree. And some of you will remember they would take it like a willow branch and they would strip all the leaves off of it and leave just 2 or 3 leaves on the end. And I watched her as she got that switch, and I decided I was going to run from her, and I took off running. And I was running as hard and as fast as my little legs would carry me. My mother was behind me. I had a head start over. And every once in a while I would glance back, and she wasn't gaining any ground on me, but I'd run probably a couple of blocks, and the thought started going through my mind that sooner or later I couldn't keep going and she was going to catch me. And then I started thinking that the further I ran, the harder the spanking would be. And at some point I just gave up and let her catch me. And I think that's why what's going on in the world today reminded me of that potential spanking that I was going to get. I was doing everything I could to get away from her, thinking I could avoid the spanking, knowing all along that I couldn't. She was going to catch me. We're being asked to self-quarantine. We're being asked to stay home, except for an emergency. Some of us are not taking this seriously at all. Not at all. Especially if we're younger. We're thinking, oh, we're healthy. We can survive it. And we probably can. Those of us who are really young probably can. But those of us who are older or whose immune systems are not where they should be or supposed to be, we may not survive it. I truly believe what the experts are telling us, that if we can just stay in for a period of time, we can slow down the spread of it. And I think that's what reminded me of the story of running from my mother. The sooner we can self-quarantine and stay in, just bite the bullet and do it, the sooner this is all going to be over. And I don't think there's a one of us that doesn't want this behind us. So something that I've decided to do, I have lots of projects going on, but something that I've decided to try to do is document this period of my life. The coronavirus, the COVID-19. I've decided in some way to document it, and part of that will be my YouTube videos that I do during this period. But I'm also trying to keep somewhat of a journal or a record of what I do every day. And as I said, I've never been a real journaler. I have a good friend who journals every single day. I know a lot of people do. I buy the journals. I buy beautifully bound books with every intention of writing in them, and I never do. I never do. But I've decided at least to take a few notes of what I'm doing every day and maybe what I'm thinking, and not try to just write it out, but just little notes so that I have something that I can pass on to my grandchildren and my great-grandchildren and the great-greats of what happened in early 2020 to me. Because so many of us, unless you're my age possibly or older, you don't remember World War II. You don't remember it. But a lot of sacrifices were made here in America, in the United States, for World War II. Although there were no battles fought here, we made tremendous sacrifices. And many of us are not too aware of what our own families went through during that period of time. And I wanted to show you something, and this is how I keep it. And this is one of my dearest possessions in the world. And this is it. I've got some things in it to give me some bookmarks. But look at this. Let me tell you what this is. My mother, her youngest sister, the youngest of the 9, was just a few years younger than she was. And she was my Aunt Mary. And she was married to my Uncle Kenny. And they had no children. When she died, they had been married for 61 years. So we never really knew why she didn't have children. No one ever questioned it. I don't think anyone ever asked her. We did know this about her. We knew that she had only known my Uncle Kenny for 1 week when they got married. And when they got married, she went with him immediately to Chicago, from Northwest Tennessee to Chicago to live. And she had known him 1 week. The year after I retired, my mother had just died. A few months later, I got a phone call from her. She was still up in that Northwest Tennessee at this point. They had moved back there. I got a phone call from her, and she told me that she had some bad news, that she had been diagnosed with lung cancer. Now, for as long as I could remember, they walked miles every single day. They had a garden. They grew everything they ate. And she was always canning and preserving. So what they ate was healthy. But when she was real young, she had smoked. She said, I hate to ask you this, but do you think you could come and take care of me for a little while, maybe a couple of weeks? And I said, well, absolutely. I'm not doing anything else. I just retired. It was about a 6-hour drive for me. And she said, well, I was surprised at my age, because she was 80. She said, I'm surprised at my age that they'll even do surgery, but my doctor said because I'm in such good health, he thinks the surgery will be successful. They're just going to take a little part of my lung. And she said, if you could just come the day I get out of the hospital and stay a couple of weeks and just help Kenny with my recovery until I'm sort of on my feet. And I said, tell me when the surgery is. And she told me, and I said, I'll be there. So I packed up a little bag. I knew I was going to be gone for a couple of weeks, and I didn't take very much because I knew we would be at her house. I was not going to be in the hospital with her, and I could wash. I could take just a change or two of clothes, and everything would be okay. I got to the hospital, and she had taken a turn for the worse. They couldn't figure out what was wrong with her, but she was not getting better from the surgery, and they were keeping her. And from the time I got there, I did not leave the hospital for 6 weeks. They lived about 25 miles from the hospital. And I had my uncle come every morning after the traffic had died down, and I made him leave the hospital before the 5 o'clock traffic so that he could miss it. I lived in the hospital for 6 weeks. I ate in the hospital cafeteria. My uncle would take my clothes home and wash them and bring them back. But I would leave her just long enough to go to the cafeteria and eat. I had taken my knitting So I did some knitting. I could do that. But she just didn't get any better. And when we got through the funeral and everybody came in, I decided to stay another 2 or 3 weeks with my uncle just to help him take care of business. And we were going through some of her belongings. And he pulled this diary out and he said, I want to give this to you. And I know that many of you are old enough to know what a 5-year diary is, and that's what this is. It's so fragile. I mean, it is so fragile. I have to be real careful with it. But for 5 years, she wrote. So I had a chance to ask my uncle some questions about how did that come about that they only knew each other, because no one had ever asked him, why didn't they have children? Now, I think she was 16 maybe when she started this journal. And I'm going to read you just very few of her entries. She says, on February the 4th, the first year, I went to school, and did I have a time? I got a letter from Eugene Brown, and boy, was it a love story. So I'm going, oh, who was Eugene Brown? My uncle had no idea. He did tell me that he knew she had a boyfriend when he met her. And I asked him, I said, when I looked at this, I said, was his name Jimmy Alexander? And he said, yes. On the inside cover of the book up here, she has Jimmy Alexander, born April 24th, 1927. I love him. And then all of her information, and she has a cross like this with LOVE down here, and underneath it she has Jimmy. She's just written so much in here. Okay, this was January the 5th, 1942, so this is when she actually, the year she started. I started to school, but there wasn't any because it was so cold. Went to Norma's instead. I got up, built a fire, and then ate breakfast and washed out a few pieces. Jimmy and I are going to get married someday. He is so sweet. Had a thing for Jimmy, didn't she? Jimmy Cole and Jimmy Alexander left for the Navy on the 25th. Cornelia and I went to the town, next town over, came back. We were lost without those boys. Okay. This is a little bit later. Jimmy went back to camp at Great Lakes at 8:31. We went to the depot with him. I really miss him. I'm happy once more because Jimmy and I are back together. Again, we are going to get married when he comes home, if I don't step out on him. This is my aunt. Not long after that, I dated Sergeant Marshall from the base at a little town close by. We went to Betty's. I kid you not, he's swell. She's probably turning over in her grave as we speak. What happened then is that my Uncle Kenny was stationed in the Chicago area, and he and some friends came down and to that area. One of them had relatives there. They drove down in a car. And the bottom line is, my aunt went to Betty's with a friend, and my uncle and his friends went to Betty's too that night, and she met him, and it was on a Monday night. On Saturday morning, he proposed to her, and she said yes, but the deal was she would have to go back with him. And at that time, you could drive to Corinth, Mississippi and get married without any kind of a waiting period, and that was quite a drive from where they were. They all piled in the car. And somewhere in here, she listed there were 7 people in that car driving to Corinth, Mississippi for them to get married, and they got married at midnight. And they came back to this little town. She packed a bag, and they headed to Chicago. No children, 61 years, less than a week. Ken and I went to see Captain Caution and Captains and Fury at the Senate Theater. Ken and I went to see Razor's Edge at the Paradise. We had a swell time. On May the 6th, 1947, she writes, "It rained today." So Ken and I are staying in and going to bed early. I love him. He's asleep. This is why It's so important to keep some kind of journal for those that come after us. This was during the war. She was beautiful. He was handsome. If I can put a picture of them in, I will. I'll have to scan it. There's nothing I would take for this. Every time I look at it, I find something new about her. I learn something new about her.
The rose. Some say love, it is a river that drowns the tender seed. Some say love, it is a razor that leaves your soul to bleed. Some say love, it is a hunger, an endless aching need. I say love, it is a flower, and you its only seed. It's the heart afraid of breaking that never learns to dance. It's the dream afraid of waking that never takes a chance. It's the one who won't be taken, who cannot seem to give, and the soul afraid of dying that never learns to live. When the night has been too lonely and the road has been too long, and you think that love is only for the lucky and the strong, just remember in the winter, far beneath the bitter snows, lies the seed that with the sun's love in the spring becomes the rose. And this was put together. All of the calligraphy and the cut work was done by Cindy Jacobs in 1991. And that's when I purchased this at a street fair in Memphis. And this is hung in every house I've lived in since then. Another one of my favorite possessions. Regret staying in and not only protecting yourself, but not contaminating others. Know that I love you, and I'll see you real soon. Bye-bye.